All right, I'll call the meeting to order. It's now 4 o'clock. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings, and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact pec@london.ca. First matter is disclosures of pecuniary interest. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? There being none, we will move on to the consent matters. I think we were going to have a very brief presentation on item 2.1. So I'll just ask that that be pulled and just ask if there's any other matters that councilors wish to have pulled. There being none, then I'll look for a mover and seconder for the balance of the items. Moved by Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Lewis. And before I call the vote, does anyone have any comments on the consent items? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a quick question through you to staff on consent item 2.6 and 2.7. These are holding provisions that are being lifted, and I know that we did receive an objection, which I found very unusual for a holding provision. And I want to just ask through you to staff about the objection letter and what would be the process for any individual wanting to review the urban growth boundary.
Go ahead, staff.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's Bruce Page here. The revisions are the holding provision. The objective of the holding provision. It relates to a previous situation under the rules with MDS where there was proximity of a livestock barn to residential development. There's been changes within the Act that allow proximity to livestock operations if it's within the urban growth boundary, and that's the case in this situation. So we're suggesting the removal of the holding provision. With regards to the expansion of the UGB, the applicant could make a request through council, through you. It will be reviewed through the planning department holistically across the city and not in isolation of just one property. So there will be a review coming up that'll look at, again, the urban growth boundary in its entirety, as opposed to in just one area.
Thank you. Anything further, Councillor?
No, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Anything further on the items except for 2.1? There being none, I will call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And to circle back to 2.1, I brief summary of this matter in terms of the implications and of this decision.
Yes, thank you. It's Travis Beth here. Through the chair, I can provide a short summary. Before you this evening is an information report regarding an update on London Plan appeals and the results of an April 15th decision by the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, the LPAT. Just as a brief reminder, the general appeals were divided into 4 phases, and a hearing was held in September to October of 2020 to address phases 1A and 1B. Since that time, staff and appellants have worked extensively to seek settlement on appeals of phase 2 and 3 issues, which is the natural heritage, the city design, city building, and mobility policies. This included 4 weeks of settlement meetings held with city staff and appellants earlier this year. And the result of that was a series of recommended resolutions. Then on April 15th, the LPAT held a case management conference, which is a type of hearing, and they heard a motion for partial approval of the plan, including that alternative language mapping and withdrawn matters from the appellants. The motion was on consent, so agreed to by all parties. The result of the LPAT's decision on April 15th was that all of phase 2, natural heritage, and phase 3, the mobility, city building, and design issues were resolved on a citywide basis, so notwithstanding some site-specific appeals. As a result of that, 97% of the London Plan policies are now in effect. Appendix A to the staff report includes that alternative policy language and identifies which policies were withdrawn. Just to highlight a few, character policies for neighborhoods, street network policies, parking policies for large developments, building design and materials, sidewalk requirements, right-of-way widths and associated land acquisitions, urban forestry, components of the natural heritage system, evaluation criteria for certain components, mitigation around wetlands, and ecological buffers. So what policies remain include certain place types, heights or intensity policies, bonus zoning policies, the high density residential overlay, and then some site-specific policies and specific area policies. Those matters were generally deferred from the phase 1B hearing held in October of 2020. And in part, that was because of provincial legislation changes around bonus zoning. So since the London Plan includes a framework of heights related to bonus zoning, a London Plan amendment would be required. And then in addition to the policies, the April 15th decision brought map 4, the active mobility network, and map 6, the hazards and natural resources map, in force in its entirety, both of those. Map 5 is natural heritage map that was brought in force except for certain site-specific appeals. And map 1, the place types, it was partially approved with significant numbers of place types now in force on map 1. The appendices to the staff report also include copies of map 1 and 5 for reference. As next steps, staff are now preparing a consolidated version of the plan, which will be published on the city's website shortly. Staff will continue to work to scope and explore potential resolution of the remaining appeals. The next case management conference before the LPAT is scheduled in October of this year, at which time the LPAT can consider any further modifications that are proposed by the parties. Again, as a result of this LPAT decision, 97% of London Plan policies are now in force, and this was the result of a positive collaborative settlement process with modifications that were intended to clarify policy intent, align with provincial legislation and regulations, and ensure accurate mapping in the plan. Thank you.
I just want to say that report was comprehensive, yet it was concise, and best of all, it was in plain English. So thank you very much for that. Do councillors have any questions or comments? Although giving the report that kind of commentary, I assume it's just no questions would be necessary, but let's go through this anyways. Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, thank you for the report. I quite agree, Mr. Chair. It was to the point, concise, and I do appreciate the update. I just want to make a comment and thank staff for the several months of extensive settlement meetings and collaboration that had to go on to get 97% of the London Plan done. In particular, Ainsley Anderson, I think there's a lot of work that went into this. I want to thank staff and look forward to, I guess, the the published or the update. A quick question though, when it comes to amendments and the provincial legislation, and there's been a number of changes, in particular the bonusing. When are these amendments introduced? Do we wait till the end, or just a little bit more of a, as legislation changes, when is it introduced into the plan?
Staff, go ahead.
Through the chair, this is Justin Adama. I can take a crack at that. So when the legislation changed through Bill 108, affecting the bonus policy regime, it gave a 2-year transition window, which began in, I believe it was September of 2020. So we have until September 2022 to consider changes to how we approach bonusing. We've started to undertake that review already, and I expect probably towards the end of this year or into early next year, you'll see a report with details on what we're going to do with bonusing.
Look forward to that report, and thank you very much to everyone to getting it almost completed.
Anything further on this? Mayor Holden?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. So appreciating that the greatest amount of the of this process has been done from a quantity standpoint, I sense there are still some fairly big things in front of us that have to be dealt with. So through you, Chair, to staff, what's your sense of timing in terms of, if we'd said this, we've got a wrap on this, what's your best guess, please?
Go ahead, Scott.
Through the chair, a lot of the timing associated with this process is driven by the LPAT, so it's very hard for us to predict. I would say that our next case management conference is scheduled for this October, and we have settlement meetings scheduled. So it's possible that portions of remaining appealed portions, if we're able to reach a settlement, could be approved then, and if not, my expectation is that hearing time would be scheduled at that case management conference, probably for some time in 2022.
Well, I appreciate that, and Chair, through you, thank you, staff and all the parties involved in terms of working together to get to the right place. I think it's much appreciated, certainly. That's it for me.
Anything further from the committee? All right, call the vote on this matter, 2.1. Oh, I need a mover seconder. Moved by Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Sorry about that. Go ahead. We'll call the vote now.
Mayor Holder?
Yeah, I spoke with my mute button on. I'll be voting yes, please.
Closing the vote.
To schedule item 3, participation meeting with regard to 193 to 197 Central Ave and 200 Albert Street. I need a motion to open the public participation meeting. Moved by Mayor Holder, seconded by someone. Councillor Hopkins. If nothing further, I'll call the vote on that. Thank you.
Closing the vote. The motion carries 6.
Staff report on this matter, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Catherine Matten. This is an application for an extension to the existing T70 temporary zone that currently applies to 3 properties municipally addressed as 192 to 196 Central Avenue, 193 to 197 Central Avenue, and 200 Albert Street. The purpose of the requested extension is to permit the continued use of the existing surface commercial parking lots for a maximum of 3 years. 192 to 196 Central Avenue and 193 to 197 Central are in the neighborhood's place type of the London plan with a high density residential overlay, while 200 Albert is in the rapid transit corridor place type. All 3 properties are designated multifamily high density residential in the 1989 official plan and are also subject to specific policies for the Talbot mixed use neighborhood in both official plans. It should be noted that these sites are located outside of the downtown and are not captured in the downtown parking strategy study area. However, 193 to 197 Central Avenue and 200 Albert Street are identified as underutilized sites in our Move Forward London's downtown plan. Through the circulation of this application, some members of the public were concerned that the continued use of these sites as surface commercial parking lots prevent long-term redevelopment, while others expressed support for the parking lots, identifying their need to supply parking to serve businesses on Richmond Row. The 1989 official plan and the London plan both provide specific criteria to inform the review of applications for temporary zones. Staff is satisfied that this criteria has been met for this application and that the extension of 3 years is appropriate to serve the area residents and businesses along Richmond Row until such time as alternative parking and transit options are available. The recommended amendment would not compromise long-term redevelopment, but rather provide an interim use until redevelopment occurs. The use of the subject sites as surface commercial parking lots has demonstrated a measure of compatibility over time. And as such, staff is satisfied the recommended amendment is consistent with the provincial policy statement and is in conformity with the temporary use policies of the London Plan and the 1989 official plan. And it is recommended the 3-year extension be approved. Thanks, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any technical questions only, please, committee? There being none, we will go to presentations. Is the applicant making a presentation?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. It's Scott Allen from MHBC Planning.
Good afternoon.
Yes, and I'll make a very brief presentation on behalf of the applicant. And with me today, I should mention, representing the applicant is Muki Pandaki, and he's available to answer any questions as well. At this time, we'd like to express our support for the findings and recommendation of the Development Services Report as presented by Ms. Matten. In particular, we agree with the finding that the proposed extension of the temporary commercial parking permissions for these properties would help address local parking demands in the near term and would not undermine the long-term redevelopment potential of these lands. This finding also reflects the commentary provided in our planning justification report, which was submitted in support of this application. So with that in mind, Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank the committee for its consideration and will gladly answer any questions members may have.
Thank you very much. Any other delegations from the public? Shouldn't say delegations, speakers. Are there any?
Mr. Chair, we do have some members of the public who wish to speak.
Okay.
And the first would be Mr. Rajani.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. You'll have 5 minutes to speak, sir, so you can start right now.
Thank you very much. This is my first time speaking. I'm a downtown business owner, and I live close to downtown in the Piccadilly area with my family, for 4 children. And I understand the need for parking in downtown. I understand the need in this specific area, and with regard to the official plan and the Talbot area, and I just think how this bylaw extension needs some more consideration. And I think committee members will have seen the various written representations from members of the public expressing different concerns. I mean, I think there are more voices out there, more members of the public who are maybe not writing letters and are communicating concerns in other ways, in other forums. I hear the representations and from staff, and I see in this report it says that extending the temporary use T70 zone for additional 3 years will have no impact on the potential for the long-term redevelopment of the site. However, I think at the same time, there's been extensions and extensions on these temporary things for 3 years for some of these sites over 20 years, and I think it's just not really a fair way of saying it's really temporary. And when we recognize that there is the need for development downtown, we recognize that these are underutilized sites, in the words there of the report, and these measures, while this, the sites outside the downtown, the parking strategy area, The gradual phasing out of surface commercial parking lots is recommended to avoid parking shortages while this actually comes to fruition. And the short-term extension would continue to provide parking in the core to serve every residents and businesses, which absolutely we need. But this has to be short-term, and I saw that last year. In last April, because of COVID, these conversations around having a new parking structure develop, those understandably because of the financial uncertainty, those conversations had to be shelved by the city. And I think if we keep giving these 3-year extensions, then that's not really encouraging those kinds of projects that we absolutely need. The development of the better alternatives to parking, and that is budgeted for. I know there's a budget there in building a sustainable city that London's infrastructure is built, maintained, and operated to meet the long-term needs of our community. And so replacing surface parking with efficient, convenient, and cost-effective public parking resources to support business, personal, social activity in the downtown. And I think we got to think about that. And so I understand that this committee is unlikely to go against the recommendations of staff on this matter. I just invite you to consider whether a 3-year extension is appropriate, whether it could be a shorter period of time, even if it's slightly shorter, just to send the message that this is not just a carte blanche to keep getting these extensions and not doing anything to develop these sites while integrating parking into those developments, of course. And the other thing with parking as well, as much as there is a need, and I know you don't have to consider this because this is not a new policy as such, but to think about this climate emergency evaluation tool and to think about what is the climate emergency, what's the climate impact of this, and is there a better way of doing this? How can we be encouraging more other forms of transportation other than cars? And I think that has to be considered at the same time as when you're doing anything with parking. You have 1 minute remaining. Thank you very much. And so I think so. Those are the things that I invite this committee to consider. I think there's like I said, I know you're unlikely to vote against this, but to say could it be less than 3 years? How can we re-examine? I know there'll be more parking matters coming up on this committee in the next weeks, months. But how can we encourage those different forms of parking that are going to be better and different forms of transportation? So thank you for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to share this with you today.
Thank you very much for coming to speak to us. Very much appreciated. Next speaker.
Mr. Chair, this would be Ms. McKeating.
Yes.
Hi there, can people hear me?
I can certainly hear you.
Oh dear, maybe I should talk quieter.
No, it's okay. I have, you can start now and it'll be 5 minutes.
Okay, thanks a lot. So I am Kelly McKeating and I'm speaking today on behalf of the London Region branch of the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario. And like the prior speaker, I'm also, and we as an organization are opposed to yet another round of renewal of these temporary parking zoning amendments. I don't know how many parking spots there are in the downtown and adjacent to downtown area as compared to 10 years ago. I can certainly think that in recent months, there was a demolition at York and Talbot Street, if I recall correctly, which expanded the parking, the surface parking lot availability downtown. There was also a demolition a number of years ago at 199 Queens Avenue. I think that if there is another zoning amendment allowed here, there is absolutely no motivation for a property owner to ever develop the land or sell the land to somebody who does want to do an appropriate development. The denial of these and similar applications would certainly motivate the owner to either develop or sell. And then the land would no longer be underutilized, in the words of the planner. The other thing that a denial of these applications would do is put less pressure on developers to demolish heritage property when they do want to develop. It would be really nice if more vacant land was available to them. I would also question whether these parking spots truly are needed. I work very close to a large parking lot at Piccadilly and St. George Street. And pre-pandemic, my observation when I was walking out during the workday is that that parking lot is not close to being completely full. And it's only 3 or 4 blocks away from these parking lots. And that's all I have to say today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you coming to speak to us today. Any other speakers?
Mr. Chair, the last person on this item is Charlene Jones.
Great.
Hi, thank you.
Hi, it's you have 5 minutes to speak, starting right now.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm the owner of Artistic Spa. I am a downtown business and property owner. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak today. When I started my business 33 years ago, Richmond Row was full of beautiful boutiques, salons, and restaurants, all thriving businesses. We didn't have these parking lots, only a pleasant shopping experience. Today, it's a very different feel. It doesn't have the same vibe. It's not a good experience anymore. It's no longer thriving with people shopping. We now rely heavily on 8 months when the students living in the area come to shop, eat, and drink. But they're walking or taking cabs. They're not usually driving. I wonder what this area would have been like today had we voted for residential development several years ago. I do know pre-COVID, these parking lots were not all fully utilized. And now with people working from home, we certainly won't need all 3 lots. Downtown needs people. We need people living downtown to support the businesses, especially now with the housing shortage in London. Now's the time to encourage and help property owners with new development. I'm not sure what another 3 years of empty lots would look like for the future of downtown. Currently, the lots are attracting drugs, crime, and homelessness, all which discourages people from wanting to come downtown. We need change. We need to create a wonderful shopping experience again. That's my input.
Thank you very much. It's very much appreciated. Thanks for speaking to us today. Any other speakers today? No.
Mr. Chair, we have no more members of the public on the list or on the call.
Great. Thank you very much. Could I get some motion to close the public participation meeting then? Just need a mover and seconder. Moved by Councilor. Someone, I'm hoping. Councilor Hopkins, thank you very much. That's the burden of being the in all the motions. Anything further on that, then I'll call the vote.
Chair will vote yes.
Without Councilor Hopkins, we'd be here all night.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Just for the committee's benefits, some of the concerns that were expressed by the public, I don't think it would be a terrible idea to just have either staff or the applicant address those concerns with regards to when would there be future development and the actual need for parking in the area. Perhaps those 2 concerns could be addressed first by staff or the applicant if the applicant wishes to.
Mr. Chair, I'd be glad to respond briefly on the matters raised by the
This is the applicant, I take it? I can't see you, so.
My apologies. I can turn my video on if that helps.
It's up to you. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, a little close to the screen.
Go ahead.
Yes, anyway, Scott Allen, MHBC. With respect to the issue of need, that's outlined, Mr. Chair, in our planning report. We've identified, and the client has identified that the parking lots in question, certainly pre-COVID, were used at a fairly substantial capacity on a regular basis. and were very critical for the Richmond Row tenants that are located in close proximity, as well as residents in the area somewhat as well utilize those parking lots. They certainly are utilized, but with respect to future opportunities, this is something that certainly our client has reviewed in some detail, and they're exploring options, potential infill opportunities at these locations, particularly given the planning permissions that are available through the London plan and the attractiveness of this area. So it's certainly there's certainly a movement towards exploring opportunity. Well, they are exploring opportunities, but movement towards redeveloping these sites and recognizing where we're at in terms of COVID and situations with the downtown parking structures that was discussed. There just needs to be more time available, we're requesting, in order to follow up on those studies and planning reviews and looking at opportunities, and then moving forward with redevelopment proposals.
Thank you very much. I hope that was helpful to the committee. So I'll open it up to the committee for any questions and comments at this time. And then if someone wishes to make a motion at some point, we can go ahead and do that. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. I just think that it might be better if I just move the staff recommendation now, and then we can have the discussion around that, so we actually have a motion on the floor.
Fair enough. So if someone's prepared to recommend the staff second the staff recommendation, Councillor Hillier is prepared to do that. So it's moved and seconded. So now we'll be speaking to the staff recommendation. I'll start with Councillor Lehman.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I just want to get this out of the way. While I have a business on Richmond Street, I have not declared pecuniary interest here, as I have my own private parking lot for customers and staff. However, many businesses along Richmond are not that fortunate. There are some businesses that have it along Kent Street and Albert Street and Central. But what we hear constantly about folks that don't live in the core and that want to shop downtown is that parking is foremost of their concerns. Until we have a better parking strategy for all of downtown and relook at a parking garage on Queen, I think it would not be prudent at this time, especially as we're coming out of COVID and a lot of businesses are facing severe times, to throw this in the mix. These parking lots not only provide parking for customers and employees of businesses in the area, but they also provide much needed parking for those outside of the core to come down to events in the park and downtown. So I think that during this time, until we have a parking strategy, it would not be wise to not allow these parking lots to operate for the next 3 years. It was brought up that there's a concern of, impeding development. What impedes development is demand, and that has changed in the last 20 years. We've seen demand grow substantially for development in the core, and you can see it by the cranes in the sky. So I think that's a check on this. The owner of these properties will definitely see increased value that might not have been there even 5 years ago on the proposed development. And that's where, eventually I think we should go in this. I think we should see development, but I think we should see development that provides equal amount of parking for the public as well as those occupants of the buildings themselves. So I will be supporting this staff report.
Thank you very much. I have Mayor Holder to speak.
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate being recognized to discuss the issue. It's one of these challenges, and I've certainly heard from colleagues in the past around parking lot renewals or various renewals that aren't consistent with a longer term strategy. And it's almost, if you will, like a holding provision in that it seems held. And I do not know how long we are going to have perpetual parking in that area. I know it's a 3-year extension, and this would have renewed in the previous council, and as you know, it's every 3 years. I asked someone, not this particular applicant, but someone else who was involved in actually a golf range once. And I said, why a 3-year renewal? And they said, because we can't get a 5. And whether that satisfies anyone, I'm not so sure. But I think there's a reality that you either believe that parking is needed in downtown or not. But downtown isn't Richmond Road, downtown isn't the Market Garden, it isn't Talbot and York. It's all around the city. And so as I've been trying to understand better the needs for parking downtown, I think if we looked at the total number of overall parking spots, downtown, by the way, being identified as, I think basically if we use London downtown as the BIA from effectively the tracks up to, it jogs a bit, but basically towards, but not including Oxford and Richmond, certainly goes to the river and over to Wellington and arguably Waterloo. But nonetheless, what I see, and I thought Councillor Lehman made some points about it, isn't just for the merchants, but if you're trying to attract merchants to downtown, to me, it's geographic parking. Do you have the right parking in the right place? And this certainly does accommodate some of the Richmond Row, a number of them, Richmond Row merchants. It also supports some of the restaurants and facilities that have later evening events. And again, we're talking post-COVID. And it also accommodates events. And so, and we have those when we will have them back. And I'm hopeful and mindful that at some point post-COVID we will. But I'm more struck by the notion of geographic parking now. I'm taken with that somehow, some way we need to ensure that we've got the right parking in the right places. I'm not sure we're quite there yet, but do I think we probably have a lot of parking overall? Yes, but are they in the right spots? If someone has a shop on Dundas, are they going to park up by this facility to go down there? Likely not. Targeted shopping or whatever it might be. Not everybody will stroll from one section to another. And I think the other thing is what we're trying to find is a mixed use, Chair. So what we're trying to do is to find how you accommodate various forms of transportation, be it busing, be it bicycles, be it motorized vehicles, which are coming up on our agenda as well, not on this agenda today, pedestrians particularly, and cars. And how you try to find that balance becomes, I think, the big challenge. But I think right now it's clear to me from what I've heard from my individual solicitations of merchants in the area that it's important and appreciated. What I've heard from event planners, it's important and appreciated. And long-term development on this, I will look forward to receiving longer-term some report from this this particular applicant as to what their plans and intent is going to be. Because I don't see this, and I'm trying to be realistic, I don't see this as a short term. This is now going to be developed into something else. I don't see it. I mean, it's been anywhere from, and I have some notes on this, Chair, but anywhere from, I think, something like 15 to 25 years where we've had in those three areas, quote unquote, temporary parking. I think it's mistermed. I think it's long-term parking, if I'm being realistic about it, with the proviso, and maybe it gives hope to the community, I'm not sure, but that's some longer-term perspective of development. But I don't see it in the short term, if I'm being quite candid about it. So there is a need, and I will support because I believe there is a need. I don't want to give a false hope or expectation that somehow 3 years from now, we are going to be moving this from parking to something else. So that'll be ultimately the decision of the applicant or council who says enough, that we're not, we think we've got sufficient parking around from a geographic standpoint. We're not there today. And because we're not there today, I'll be prepared to support this. Thanks.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a quick question, but I just want to make a quick comment following the mayor's remarks about changing the name of temporary. parking to long-term parking. I think that makes a lot of sense, given that we're to about 28 years here on this temporary parking. But a quick question through you to staff, following Councillor Lehman's comments about the parking strategy and the need. I know we have a downtown parking strategy. I'm wondering if we need a parking strategy for this area as we deal with rapid transit coming into the area, but the changes that are happening downtown, and just wondering why it was left out of the parking strategy that we already have downtown. So just two quick questions.
Staff?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's Paul Yeoman speaking. I'm not sure actually if we've got anyone on the call actually that'd be able to speak to the history of the parking strategy. Mr. Kosfis might be able to speak to it if he's available.
Through the chair, I don't recall why it was limited to the boundaries that it was, but we could look into that and get back to you prior to council if that would be helpful.
Thank you. Councillor, go ahead.
And I just kind of questioned just listening to the comments from committee members, which I really do appreciate hearing from about, do we need a parking strategy as we deal with, like I said, rapid transit coming into the downtown core development, the need for housing, et cetera. So I just want to, I look forward to hearing a little bit more about our parking strategy, and I'll just listen to everyone else's comments before I do my follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm happy to support the staff recommendation here. Certainly, if the owners of the parking lots find a development that's more valuable than parking, they'll pursue it, because we see that happening in parking lots around the city, particularly some of the shopping centers. There's more buildings and stores popping up on those parking lots. I'm also happy to keep parking for a little while because we've implemented a film industry strategy. And one thing that's valuable to that industry is, of course, plentiful parking near the places where they're trying to shoot. So if we want to see some shooting happening downtown, and I think that's a good idea, those parking spaces might become valuable for that industry. I can't say for sure, but certainly it's very difficult for them to do something similar in Toronto, whereas here it might be really attractive, and we could pull in some more productions simply by virtue of having these spaces available in a location close to our commercial centers. Thank you.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues have already highlighted a number of the points that I would have raised, so I'm going to not try and repeat them too much. Certainly, I'm going to emphasize one piece, though, that the mayor mentioned, which is geography, and geography does matter in a parking strategy. I think it's really key to mention this in conjunction with the heritage concern we had. You know, to me, you're not going to fill up heritage buildings on Dundas Place, for example, or on Richmond Row, if you don't have parking for the businesses who are interested in locating there for their employees and for their customers. So there has to be a parking strategy that recognizes geography does matter. You know, and respectfully, people are not going to walk from, say, the Albert Street parking lot down to Dundas Place. So every day, if they're an employee going to work in one of those heritage buildings. So if we want to talk about the value of heritage in the downtown, you know, parking is actually related to that, because empty buildings are going to be difficult to fill up if there's not an opportunity for some level of parking. And while rapid transit is coming to the core, you know, if you've ever tried to carry home a large heavy item from a shopping excursion, transit's not necessarily going to replace the personal automobile for some of those trips. Yes, there should be a mix, and we want that mix. That includes, by the way, cycling as well. But to ensure that that mix is available, we have to have adequate parking. So I just thought it was really important to reference the fact that we do have a number of heritage buildings that don't have easy, geographically convenient access to parking. You know, I too would like to see something come back in the not too distant future around the municipal property on Queen. I thought that there was an opportunity there, and then COVID did shelve that, as we heard referenced earlier. So that's really important as well. But ultimately, we need some of these other parking opportunities developed, and hopefully we're talking about parking garages, and certainly I agree that surface parking is not the best use of space. But when we have parking that's being utilized, we need that to be replaced before there's an opportunity to take it away and allow development to continue in some cases. I'm really encouraged to see that a number of the towers that are under development in the downtown do include some parking garage structures as well, and they're not reliant on surface parking. And I think that's an important direction for us to continue to take as we move forward.
Before we go on, I just wanted to ask a question of someone from staff, and perhaps I'm mistaken, but it seems to me that we've had reports in the past on a downtown parking strategy being developed. And in fact, I remember challenging staff about putting the request for proposals on the parking garage on Queens Ave as part of a development on hold pending COVID. So it may be helpful to the committee if someone can just tell me is there a strategy in place? Is there a strategy being developed, or is there a strategy that's been put on hold, just so we're clear as we move ahead? Someone want to take a stab at that?
Sure. Through the chair, there is actually a downtown parking strategy. It was adopted by council, and it is in place. The question from Councillor Hopkins was more about the limits of the boundaries with respect to the study area, and it was focused on the downtown primarily. But I'm just trying to ascertain the edges or the limits of the border and why the particular border was established. But with respect to the study itself, yes, it is actually adopted by council, and it does address all of the downtown parking needs. There was actually 6 sub areas, and it even broke down the parking demands within those areas all throughout the downtown. So that is in place, and that's available to all of council.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kotsovas. I just thought that would be good to put that on firm ground as to where we are. Okay, committee, anything further? Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, if I may, I'd like to make some comments, and just following up on Mr. Kostov's comments about the downtown parking strategy. This comes to us quite often at a planning committee on these temporary use parking lots. And that strategy is very helpful in determining if we should allow another 3-year extension or not. And I find this recommendation coming from staff, that strategy is very helpful. So it points out what areas are high demand, what are low demand. And we've heard quite a bit from the public. And I want to thank the public, first of all, for coming out, because as we deal with these temporary parking applications, I am starting to hear more from the public the need to maybe not approve them. As much as we've also received comments saying that we do need to accommodate the businesses in the area that do not have parking. And I appreciate what Councillor Lehman said. So not having that strategy, really, which way are you going to go? And I am supportive of looking at not extending these temporary applications, because they're not temporary. And given the number of changes that are going on in the downtown area, maybe there is an opportunity where we could say no to these applications. I'm glad the applicant's consultant is here. It gives me some hope to think that they are exploring opportunities for development, but maybe we should do things in a different way to support downtown. I was just interviewed in a survey that the downtown group is doing on the strategic plan. And one of the things I passed on to them was I hear from the public that we have too many empty lots downtown. And that's something I want to be consistent. Like I said, applications have come forward throughout the years on these extensions. I haven't supported them in the past, and I think I'll continue not to support the recommendation going further, even though I understand where this committee is going to go with it. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Any further comments from the committee? All right, we have the staff recommendation on the floor, so I'll call the vote.
Chair, I'll vote yes. Mr. Mayor.
Closing the vote, the motion passes 5-1.
Item 3.2, which is a public participation meeting with regard to 2631 Hyde Park Road and 1521 Sunningdale Road West. I will need a motion to open the public participation meeting, moved by Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Unless there's anything further, I'll call the vote on that.
Chair, I'll vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6.
Staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike Corby here. I'll give you a presentation which has been added to the agenda as well to follow along with. So the subject site is located on the northeast corner of Sunningdale Road West and Hyde Park Road, right along the edge of the urban growth
Just
boundary.
to clarify, Mr. Corby, that's just for, we're trying to be a little more precise about this stuff. It's at page 304 of the added agenda, am I right?
I don't have the added agenda up. Sorry, I just have my.
I think that's correct. So committee members, don't expect to see it on your screen. It will be, it's in paper form. Am I right? Only that is appearing on your desk. So Councillor Hillier, do you have this?
Yes, I do. It's in the email. Sorry, if you're on eScribe, it's in the attachment. It's the last one down, added presentation. If you click on it, it's a very nice presentation you can look at.
All right, I just wanted to make sure that, because I've been a little lax on this in the past, making sure that all committee members actually have the presentation and are looking at it as we move ahead. So sorry, Mr. Corby, go ahead now that we're done that.
Okay. So currently I guess we're on the subject site for those second slide for those who are following along. So the site's currently used for agricultural purposes, as well as abutting agricultural lands to the north and to the east. On the site, there's an unevaluated wetland, a small one in the northwest corner, as well as 6 rural residential lots abutting the subject site. The nature of the application, the proposed application is for an official plan amendment to permit future residential uses on the subject site. The proposed amendment would change the existing open space designation to low density residential, that's within the 1989 official plan, and the green space place type to the neighborhood place type in the London plan. There's no development proposal as part of this official plan amendment process. In regards to some background on the property, the subject site was originally not included within the urban growth boundary and the Fox Hollow community plan in this area of the city. Mount Pleasant Cemetery, the owners of the subject site at the time, appealed official plan amendment 88, which was undertaken by the city. The purpose of this amendment was to establish the urban growth boundary along with the land use designations as a result of lands annexed by the city in 1993. Essentially, the lands that were to be within the urban growth boundary would be designated urban reserve community growth, and outside would be agricultural lands. Mount Pleasant Cemetery was seeking inclusion within the urban growth boundary in order to permit a cemetery as a permitted use. On December 11th, 1998, the Ontario Municipal Board provided a verbal decision on the Mount Pleasant's appeal and included the site within the urban growth boundary. At that point in time, the Fox Hollow Community Plan, which was ongoing, was nearing the completion of its process, and the subject lands were not considered or studied as part of this comprehensive review process. As a result, the subject lands were identified within the open space land use designation to meet the owner's needs through the Fox Hollow Community Plan process. This community plan was presented to Planning Committee on February 8th of 1999 and subsequently approved in March of 1999. In regards to the provincial policy statement. It's staff's opinion that the proposed amendment does not conform to the policies of the PPS. The requested designation of the subject site for residential land uses in isolation from the surrounding lands to the north and east is considered a short-term solution, which may lead to an inefficient development pattern. The proposed development does not contemplate the overall needs of the surrounding lands and does not integrate key components outlined in the PPS in regards to the integration of land use planning, growth management, transit supported development, intensification and infrastructure planning to achieve cost-effective development patterns, optimization of transit investments, and standards to minimize land consumption and servicing costs, ensuring that necessary infrastructure and public service facilities are or will be available. So in regards to a need for a comprehensive review, the subject lands have never been identified or reviewed through a comprehensive process or lands need study for development purposes or future growth. The development of the site relies on the coordination and integration of infrastructure and ultimate servicing solutions that must be provided from adjacent lands. These matters, along with determining appropriate land uses, road networks, public service facility requirements, locations, require this comprehensive review. In regard to the secondary plan process, the London Plan describes the purpose, intent, and components of a secondary plan for lands that have not been previously considered for urban development. Through a review of the site's history, it is clear that the lands have not been considered for urban development. Secondary plans are prepared to ensure that future neighborhoods are considered holistically, including the features of the neighborhood and the required municipal infrastructure. Generally, secondary plans are prepared for multiple properties and oftentimes on lands which require a coordinated approach to subdivision development. This helps with development coordination and the implementation of a neighborhood vision, character, community structure, and housing and employment areas. Secondary plans will also provide an opportunity to provide a more detailed policy guidance for the area that goes beyond the general policies of the London Plan. Once a review of the urban growth boundary is undertaken and it is determined that an expansion is warranted and the surrounding lands are approved to be within the urban growth boundary, staff will have the ability to undertake a secondary plan for the subject site and the surrounding areas. Staff is currently targeting 2020 to start a review of the urban growth boundary. Until such time, providing development potential on an isolated site is considered premature in our opinion. Also through this process and the circulation of the official plan amendment, some public concern was raised. Concerns about increased traffic, noise, construction, pollution and air quality, potential impacts on well water, loss of privacy, and then some concerns over the location of the most easterly access point identified through a conceptual plan along Sunningdale Road, as well as concerns in regard to the location of Street G that are on lands to the south of this property. Additional concerns about the scale and density of the potential development as it transitions to the rural area as well. Items such as roads, site-specific land uses, noise, setbacks, and buffering are often dealt with through more detailed planning application processes like a zoning bylaw amendment or plan of subdivision. Those processes provide additional options and tools to help us address these concerns. Staff's recommendation also helps ensure that these community concerns can be addressed through a more appropriate and comprehensive review process. A secondary plan would require public engagement prior to getting into detailed zoning for future plans of subdivision. The plan would identify higher order road networks and access points to the neighborhood and would establish a vision and policy basis for future developments in the area. In terms of our recommendations, staff is recommending refusal of the proposed official plan amendment to low density residential in the 1989 official plan and the neighborhood place types in the London Plan. And we are recommending an alternative designations. We are recommending a community growth designation and place type within both official plans. We feel they are consistent with the provincial policy statement, the 1989 official plan, and the enforced policies of the London Plan. The recommendation identifies lands for future growth while ensuring a secondary plan can be undertaken prior to its development. A secondary plan will identify and plan for the integration of land use planning, growth management, transit supportive development, intensification, and infrastructure planning. The recommended designation will prevent future compatibility issues with the surrounding lands in regard to land use impacts, servicing constraints, and sufficient public facilities being available to support the proposed development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Technical questions only, please. Councillor Hillier, technical questions, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm just looking at the isolation of this lot, and I'm wondering, can the adjacent land, oh, sorry, the adjacent storm sewers and waste sewers support this?
Staff?
Thank you, and through the chair. So there is, through the OPA review, we have looked at it, but our engineering staff are looking for holding provisions to be placed over top of the property, as the ultimate capacity for the area has not been addressed through this particular application.
Okay, again, technical questions only. Councillor Morgan? By the way, you're here because this property is within your ward, so I just thought I'd give you that introduction.
Thanks for the introduction, Chair. So my technical question is about the presentation. In a section of the presentation, Mr. Corby mentions the possibility of the urban growth boundary review, and he said that that was scheduled in, I heard 2020. So I'm wondering if you can clarify the date that he intended on when that would happen. And then I have a couple of questions about that process, if that's appropriate at this time, Mr. Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll clarify that that is 2022. My apologies. When I was typing it out, I knew I was going to say 2020, but I thought I said 2022. So sorry, it is then.
And Mr. Chair, I'll ask your advice on this. I have a couple of questions about that part of the process. Would you prefer I wait until after the public participation, or do you see that as technical?
I think that's probably technical if you'd like to do it now. Thanks
Sure,
for asking. The members of this committee never ask my permission to do anything, so it's a really nice change.
Well, you're welcome for that. So I know the basis of the staff recommendation is grounded in the idea that you could do a secondary plan on a larger block of land. My understanding is that the lands adjacent to this are considered tier 1 lands. I'd like to confirm that with our staff. And I guess I'd also like to understand, you said when the review would happen in 2022, but how long does it actually take if you were to go through this process to get to an application like this with a secondary plan? What's the estimated time frame that we'd be looking at on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's Paul Yeoman. So happy to answer those questions. The first is that the city actually doesn't have defined tiering of lands for lands outside the urban growth boundary. We did have a review that was done, I believe it was in 2013, which actually did look at some candidate sites outside the urban growth boundary if council was interested at the time of taking lands out of the urban growth boundary and bringing others in. Lands to the immediate east of these lands were identified as a candidate opportunity at that time, and we know there's significant demand interest in the northwest part of the city. In terms of the broader perspective, the urban growth boundary discussion is likely to take a year or a little bit longer than that, more than likely. From there, secondary planning process is about a year as well, too, if not a little bit more, too. So again, it would be looking at the lands holistically as the piece within the greater whole.
I think that's it for my questions at this part. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hopkins?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I understand we're still on technical questions.
We are.
Up on Councillor Morgan's question about the review of the urban growth boundary. So that's going to take place in 2022. Just want to understand the process. Is there terms of reference that would come to us to open up that review? And when would that happen?
Through Mr. Chair, I'm happy to answer that one as well. Yes, there definitely will be a terms of reference coming to council for consideration about whether or not a boundary review is something council would like us to pursue. We actually do not have direction on that yet. I should also clarify with my previous comments, the results of an urban growth boundary review would not necessarily indicate that lands in this immediate area would be included or not. I just was saying that there was a previous review that was indicating that the lands to the immediate east were good candidates for the future, but that's not necessarily the outcomes that would be resulting from an urban growth boundary review.
Any other technical questions? I have a technical question because I'm confused. My understanding is that this property is currently within the urban growth boundary. And the properties,
You're on mute, Chair.
I am? I don't think so. Am I on mute? I don't think I am, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me now? He's not answering, so I don't. Can other councilors hear me? Is that better? Can you hear me now? Thank you. Thanks for pointing that out, Mr. Mayor. So this, just from a technical point of view, this property is within the urban growth boundary, and you're talking about a boundary review to determine if other properties would come within the urban growth boundary, and in fact, possibly whether this property might get thrown out of the urban growth boundary. Is that what we're looking at? Because that wasn't the impression that I had initially.
Through you, Mr. Chair, what we're recommending is an urban reserve growth designation for the lands or future growth place type and part of the London plan. The urban growth boundary review is a separate matter. What we're saying with our recommendation is that there's not a sufficient amount of land here associated with a broader neighborhood. So for example, this isn't a straightforward matter where there is a clear geographically defined pod, for lack of a better term, where a neighborhood would exist. It does continue into broader lands beyond this and needs to be considered comprehensively through that.
I'm not sure that I understand that. So are the other lands you're talking about possibly being part of this secondary plan, are they currently within the urban growth boundary or outside of the urban growth boundary?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Morgan was asking questions about lands that are outside the urban growth boundary, and that was the nature of his question, his line of questions. But
I was talking about my question, which was, okay, I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to leave it there. I might ask questions later. Any other technical questions? Let's move to public participation then. Do we have the applicant here?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. It's Matt Campbell from Zelenka Priamo here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. If you just give me a second. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With me today is also Steve Stapleton. I'm just going to have some brief comments and turn it over to Mr. Stapleton. We're here essentially asking committee a relatively simple question of whether these lands should be used for neighborhood land uses, which is predominantly residential, in the short term or not. I think the discussion just previous to this was getting to the root of the matter. If we adopt the staff recommendation, these lands are essentially sterilized for development for the foreseeable future. We don't know when they would develop. I think the really important things for council's consideration here is that the lands are within the urban growth boundary. They're available for use. All the technical matters and concerns that staff were discussing, those can all be dealt with. And we're in the process of doing that right now. These lands can be serviced. There is a cost associated with that, which Auburn is well acquainted with and they're prepared to do. And this is an application that is very much in the public interest. And we can confirm that there's been school board interest in putting a new public school on this site. And those comments were provided in the IPR process that we undertook with the city. So I'll leave my high level comments there and we'll invite Mr. Stapleton to speak as well.
Go ahead, Mr. Stapleton.
Sorry, I had to mute there. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity. First of all, I'd like to apologize for our divergent position from staff. It's not our preference to have so many dissenting positions on a file. And that's why we require this committee and council's guidance to bring this application forward. As staff have identified, this is a small piece of land, approximately 47 acres, well over 40% of the lands are unconstrained from a natural heritage point of view. And the lands are serviced through infrastructure that's already built south of Sunningdale Road. The OPA to change the land use to neighborhood does not prejudice the city's decisions in the future or the adjacent development of lands outside the growth boundary, nor is it premature. The OPA signals to neighborhood, signals a desire to implement the policies for growth. That's what the application's for. At the beginning of this, we agreed with staff that we would bring forward the OPA in advance of the plan of subdivision to get the principle of development established. The opportunities associated with this obviously outweigh any perceived negatives that can be addressed through subsequent processes. We've provided the justification, and we believe that the subsequent plan of subdivision process can deal with any of those additional issues that the city highlights on connectivity, additional parkland linkages, and things of that nature. And we've already initiated that process and have the pre-consultation comments, and believe strongly that we can deal with all these issues. There's no need to delay this OPA or, in my words, down designate the lands to a community growth position. The board decision in 1999 identified the area for community growth, and then the subsequent Fox Hollow Community Plan, because of the landowner being a cemetery user, identified it for cemetery purposes. We've provided the justification for the change. The Hydro G report highlights a high water table that makes it not conducive for burial plots, and hence the sale of the property to Auburn. We do believe the issues on connectivity, and we have provided that to the staff. However, it's not in the report ahead of you. We just don't believe that that this land should be sterilized for a number of years. I take issue with the 2-year estimate from Mr. Yeoman, quite frankly. If that was the case, I don't think we'd be here with a negative report, because it'll take 2 years to get a subdivision approved. We therefore request that this committee and council weigh the public benefit that is in front of you with regard to public schools and parks, and the ability to add supply to the housing market that is obviously constrained. It is significant, the increases in prices, and the process itself limits the availability in a timely way. So we put this in front of you. We ask for your support of our OPA to neighborhood, because it is the beginning of the process. It's not the end of the process. There's a number of issues that we can address through subsequent processes, subdivision, that will deal with most of, if not all, the issues that were raised by staff in their presentation on road patterns. I must highlight that the road patterns to the south and the collector roads have been built to Sunningdale Road. So those connections to the north will be initiated through that. There really is no unknowns with regard to the development of this property. And we would look for your support in advancing to the next stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other presentations, public presentations?
Mr. Chair, we have Richard Cracknell joining us.
Mr. Cracknell?
Good afternoon, and thank you. I have a prepared statement I'd like to make.
You have 5 minutes, and you can start now.
I should be about 3. To start, I'd like to acknowledge the assistance and guidance that's been provided to me by your senior planner, Mike Corby. He's done an outstanding job. After reviewing the report from the Deputy City Manager, Planning and Economic Development, I agree with all the recommendations that are contained within it. Although I'm not an engineer, it's apparent to me that the submitted documents that allowing this planning application would not be the most effective and efficient use of taxpayer resources as stated in the report. I have noted that even in the applicant's documents, there are costs that have been identified. Unfortunately, the party responsible for the payment is not. As I have stated previously before in communications, the land was not included in the urban growth plan, as it was, I should say, was included in the urban growth plan as a green space cemetery. It was never considered a potential source of residential lots when the Foxwood development was being considered. As a result, no infrastructure planning was considered for the land. I would like to add further comment, though, about my concerns with respect to providing safe access to public education for elementary students if the proposed development is allowed. Thames Valley School Board has a policy of not providing transportation to elementary students who live within 1.6 kilometers of their geographical home school. It's my understanding, and I checked today on the web, that the assigned school for students would be Arthur Curry Public School, the geographically closest public school. I would also like to point out that most residential units proposed would fall within the 1.6 kilometer circumference of the school. A school that has 9 portables, and as I understand, is at capacity now. My main concern, though, is with those elementary students that would live within the 1.6 kilometers of the school and would have to walk across Sunningdale Road West, a major city artery. I think that for safety reasons, busing would be required for those students, which would be an added cost to the property taxpayers of London. To conclude, if this proposal is allowed, there is a choice to be made. Either we have an increase in property taxes to provide safe access to public education via busing, or students are put at risk by having to cross a major artery, which at the present time is 80 kilometers per hour, and there's no crossing point. I'd also like to say that I feel some of the development costs associated are being transferred to the taxpayer. Unfortunately, those costs are unknown and they're not disclosed. To move forward with unknown costs, in my mind, is irresponsible of council, and I'd like to thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, sir, for coming and speaking to us today. Other speakers?
Mr. Chair, Stephen Romano.
Mr. Romano?
Hi, sorry,
Go ahead.
I'm just attending this meeting to hear the other participants. I don't have anything to say at this time.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chair, Laura Grenier.
Ms. Grenier? Hello, Ms. Grenier?
Hi, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yeah, no, we have nothing further to say at this time. Like everything that's been submitted, I think we've made all our comments, and we support the Planning and Environment Committee recommendation.
All right, it's not the
To
committee recommendation
not
yet, it's staff's recommendation. So you're saying you support the staff recommendation? Thank you.
The staff recommendation.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Mr. Chair, that we have no other members of the public in attendance.
All right, thank you very much. I'll just need a motion to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Mayor Holder, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. If there's nothing further, I'll call the vote on that.
Chair, I'll vote yes.
Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries.
Thank you very much. So I think we'll open it up now for questions only at this point in time. If there may be an opportunity or need to ask additional questions, I anticipate. So I may be wrong, but let's just do questions for now. I guess not. All right. So I'll turn it over to the committee. I'll let Councillor Morgan go ahead since he's eager to go ahead and he's been polite to me so far. And he's the councillor for the ward. So for all those 3 reasons, Councillor, you're up.
Yes, and I actually was trying to catch you on the questions for staff part, so I'm going to do that. And I will say the reason why I was asking about the urban growth boundary wasn't because particularly I wanted to have a big discussion about the urban growth boundary, but you can't do a wider comprehensive secondary plan without having the lands in. And so that's why I was asking for the time frame. And I thought it was interesting that Mr. Stapleton said if we knew this was going to be the time frame, we probably wouldn't be here with an adverse report. So I guess my question for Mr. Yeoman or Mr. Corby or whoever's appropriate is, if you do the boundary review and the adjacent lands do not come in to the boundary, would staff be open to looking at a development plan for this piece that is in the urban growth boundary, or is the intent to keep it out and leave it in this reserve status until such time that the lands would come in to the north and east?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So if we did receive if following your chain of logic there, if further lands weren't to come in and we received another application on the site of council were to redesignate for future growth, We would still remain with the recommendation that it's premature until the balance of lands came in to actually create the neighborhood. From our perspective, this is the beginning of a brand new neighborhood. It's an area that's separated by arterial roads. It's the only proposed growth location north of Sunningdale between Hyde Park and Wonderland. There aren't any physical boundaries that would define a neighborhood associated with it. It is part of a broader whole, and it is part of a broader community that's going to be forming in this area as a result. So that's why the recommendation would remain until we actually did have the lands come in that could actually support that.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks through the chair to Mr. Yeoman. I'm going to weigh in on the debate, but I'm going to let committee members go first on this one.
Thank you, Councillor. Committee members like to speak on this matter? Move a motion, anything that we're looking at? Perhaps we need to have a discussion at first. Mayor Holder, you can start us off.
Well, I would have, but I saw that Councillor Van Hulst slightly got ahead of me, so why don't we start with him, and then I'll be happy to join in after, Chair.
Okay, I missed that. I'm not good at picking up the hands sometimes, so thanks for that. Councillor Van Hulst, go ahead.
Thank you. I actually had just a question. The issue came up of crossing Sunningdale, and I see in other communities, primarily south of the border, that there's over roadways like this, there might be a pedestrian bridge that goes up and then comes down again. And I wondered if staff could just comment on that kind of thing as an approach to making the crossings safer.
Staff, would you like to comment? I suppose you could only comment in a general way about pedestrian bridges.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to the councillor, it's Matt Felberg speaking. So just to give some perspective, we're actually putting a pedestrian bridge over Richmond Street, just north of Sunningdale. And in that case, quite a lot of planning was put into that. We actually went through an EA process in order to do that, but we also identified that bridge as in the DC study. So it's been planned for a number of years. And the financing has been established. So it wouldn't be a short-term solution if that was something we were going to do.
Thank you, that's helpful.
All right, go back to the mayor.
Thanks, Chair. I was looking at some of the history of this particular property, and it came in as a result of the 1993 annexation as it morphed through Vision 96 and the London's official plan. It was established as part of the urban growth boundary. And I read the staff report, and it's not typical of me to challenge the staff report usually, because I am grateful and appreciate the kind of thought process that goes into this kind of consideration. I think the staff are typically clear and I'll say forceful in a thoughtful way. But as I read the report, one of the things that stuck out, item 4 of on the front page, page 215 for colleagues, where it says the requested amendment is premature. I'm not sure that's totally consistent with Mr. Yeoman's comments based on Councillor Morgan's question about if the broader holistic view is not considered for that residential consideration, that they would then look at this particular application. And that gives me some cause for concern. And I do appreciate that staff, Chair, want to do this in a holistic manner in many respects. I look at this though, and a few comments. Firstly, it's within the urban growth boundary. And I think that is important. Secondly, that it's a low density application, which I think is respectful of, we've got some 6 rural tenants that properties that came in as a result of the annexation as well. So there is some residential currently on the site, albeit limited, and I recognize that it is limited. When I look at the recommendations of staff, beyond them saying that the requested amendment is premature, I read that to mean, before I heard the comments responding to Councillor Morgan, Deputy Mayor Morgan, that it meant it's not a question of if, but when. Now I feel from that comment, it's not a question of when, but if. And that gives me, I will tell you, some challenge there with it. I look at further recommendations where it says that it's without consideration of the surrounding lands is not big picture or long-term thinking. Well, I might respectfully challenge that. And yes, it would involve future land use, servicing, and road network issues, but any development must do that. Under item 7, it said that the subject site's not been reviewed for urban land uses, which would have taken into account servicing demands and school public service facility requirements. Well, I can tell you, Chair, that the executive director of Thames Valley School Board called me some weeks ago in support of this particular project because of the desperate need in Northwest London for additional schooling. And you heard one of the folks who called in talk about the portables at Sir Arthur Currie, 9 portables. That's challenging at the best of times for students in a learning environment. So I'm mindful of that. So I do believe that the issue around schooling is I think the need is there and the need is clear, and the financial ability to support that, according to Mr. Fisher, is there as well, and support from the province in that regard. And also that that the proposed amendment in isolation could result in inefficient development and land use pattern. I've got tremendous confidence in staff and their ability to work through a significant major arterial road to make this possible. And if part of this broader holistic view, Chair, is to make sure that we line up streets and the like with that broader, bigger piece of property, assuming that it gets that nod, as it were, and support from council, I'm confident that can be done as well. So to me, premature is an interesting word. And I want to come back to the point that this is within our official plan, and we like to argue the official plan. It's within the urban growth boundary. I think it's a legitimate proposal put forward by the applicant, and I'm less comfortable with delays associated with this, because only anybody in business knows that if it's a question of if not when, or when not if, then it's really if it's if not when, then this is a moot point. But if it's when not if, significant delays means significant costs. And I'm not sure that would be fair to any applicant through this process. And my final comments around this are in the tentative nature of some of the a lot of coulds in there, that it could do this or it could do that. And I just, I'm not trying to tell staff what to do, but if that was a stronger positioning, it would probably have more credence with me. So I'm not sure, Chair, what would be necessary, and I'll take some guidance from you on this, that I would move a motion to accept the recommendation, or pardon me, the application from the applicant to proceed. And I have tremendous confidence in our staff and their ability to do this. I'd mention as well that the Fox Hollow Community Improvement Plan, that piece there provides the servicing capabilities, so it's not it's not impossible to have services connect to this. So I'm not sure, and I'd go to the clerk for this, Chair, if the issue were.
Why don't we do that in a moment while you've sort of run out of time. So we'll let you can bring a motion once some other councillors have maybe made some comments. We can look at what motions we need to bring and what the wording would be. And in the meantime, the clerks could look at the wording to do what the mayor is saying. We'll come back to you. Councillor Lehman? Yeah, you're sort of out of time, but
I just wanted to thank, staff though, because I think they were very thoughtful of this. That's all, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lehman?
Thank you, Chair. When I came into this, I had, mixed thoughts. I understand, the planning staff wanting to have a more holistic view of a bigger area for proper planning. But what's foremost in my mind is our lack of housing in London. And when you have demand outstripping supply, prices skyrocket. And that's what we're seeing. Second concern I have is we know that we're running out of land in London. And the urban growth revision is going to be coming down at some point. So those were the things that were in my head coming to this meeting. What I've heard here is that, what really concerns me is the time frame on this. It looks like we're going to have an urban growth renewal strategy put in place, and minimum that's going to be 2 to 4 years. But then after further questioning of staff and comments, I'm concerned that might even be longer. The other concern I've learned tonight is that the concern of the school board. We all know the tremendous growth in the Northwest. And I think the parents of the children going to school and in those portables, that concerns me as well, and that this is a potential site for some action on that front. As we run out of land, we're going to be coming up against this situation more and more. Are we going to be putting land that is within the urban growth boundary on hold if the surrounding land is not part of the urban growth boundary? And what does that mean for future development? Being that we haven't really addressed our urban boundary and looking at a review of that, my concern is that this is going to be a long process, and I'm not comfortable delaying housing for a very long time or unforeseeable future. So those are my thoughts right now.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just following Councillor Lehman's thoughts too, I appreciate his comments. And I just have a couple questions through you to staff about how much land do we have to develop within the urban growth boundary is my first question. Or how many years do we have of development within the urban growth boundary? And my second question is, I need to have a better understanding about the timelines here with the urban growth boundary review. I'm still not clear on when the terms of reference are going to come forward and when and if a review. I heard that we may need to bring forward a motion. I just would like further clarification on the process of an urban growth boundary review. That's my second question.
And the timelines also?
Yeah, if they're available, I would think there would be a terms of reference coming forward, and I would like to know how many years of development do we have within a current.
Okay, so you want to know how much time we have with the land we have now, and then how long an urban growth boundary application would take and the process of that?
Not so much the application, but the process of a review.
The application and process. Go ahead, staff, if you can.
Thank you. To the chair, it's Greg Barrett speaking. I'll take the first cut on this. With respect to land supply, right now we still have a 20-year land supply. I think a couple of councillors have already mentioned it's an issue of geography, not supply. So there are areas in the city where there are constraints on the land supply. There are areas in the city where there aren't constraints on the land supply. The current urban growth boundary citywide has sufficient lands to accommodate growth. The notion or the question on the urban growth boundary discussions, the urban growth boundary discussions come as a result of a comprehensive review. Comprehensive review is something that council is required to take at least, 10 years after the adoption, within 10 years of the adoption of a new plan, and at least every 5 years thereafter. And it's council first asks themselves the question, do we need to have that review? We've not brought that report yet forward to council. You've been told that we're looking towards the end of 2022. We would be bringing forward a terms of reference, and that sets out the whole process. That process starts with an examination of what the land needs are. And those land needs are driven by a full review of the city's population and employment growth projections. The reason why we're waiting until later in 2020 or later in 2022 to start that process is because that's when we would expect results from the census that's ongoing now. So if the census is just being done in 2021, we would expect the results of that census in 2022. And that information informs the land need study and the whole examination of what our demographic needs would be and examining what the future growth would be. That then sets out what is your demand side. We then look at what the supply side is. And it's when we then have that discussion on this is what we're going to need in the future. This is what we have in the bank. Then that's when we determine, okay, do we need more lands? And then from that, we look at where would the most appropriate place for those lands be. And that process goes on. It is a full public process, and it's a process that's described and laid out in the terms of reference that would come before you, as we said, in 2022. So that's a long, convoluted answer. It's a 1 to 2 year process. It's a process that would start after 2022 when we would have the right information to begin to put the inputs in that process. And it's a process that begins with council saying, yes, you need to look at that. And that these are, again, there would be some parameters that we would probably ask council to do. Do you want us to look at, for example, the 360-degree view, which is the way we are in London now, which is we say we provide opportunities for growth in all areas of the city. And by having that policy and that perspective, that's where we run into the problems of, oh my gosh, we're in this area running out, where in other areas we have sufficient supply. The next time we look at it, do we want to say, well, let's be targeted. Where should we be directing growth for this first period? And then everybody knows, and that's where we direct the resources. But that's something that we will have that discussion with council before we start that process later in 2022.
Thank you. Councillor?
Yeah, thank you. I really do appreciate your answer. I think I know as a committee member, I need to understand the process. And so just following up on Mr. Barrett's answers, will these lands be part of that comprehensive lands and the lands around this this application as well?
Thank you, Chair. I guess the short answer would be yes. We would be looking at all the lands adjacent to the existing urban growth boundary as we go forward through an exercise in the future. If it's determined that we need sufficient additional lands, then we would look at all of the lands adjacent to the urban growth boundary. Or, subject to council's direction, we'd say, well, given where we're growing now, maybe we're going to focus this, and maybe it's not in the northwest, or maybe it's somewhere else. But I would imagine the direction would be, let's look at all the lands around the urban growth boundary.
And
you went on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, and I guess, Mr. Barrett, you've reminded me to make sure I fill in my consensus as well. So thank you for clarification.
Thank you. Further comments or questions on in general, and then I'll go back to the mayor because he wanted to bring a motion. And every now and again, I do what the mayor says. Not very often, but every now and again. Councillor Van Holst, you had some comments?
Thank you. More questions, Mr. Chair. So I think confirming this particular property is not outside the urban growth boundary, it's inside. And are the lands adjacent to the north outside? Through you.
I think you're being asked about the adjacent properties that you've been talking about. Are they inside or outside the urban growth boundary?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Mike Corby here. The lands to the north and the east of this site are all outside of the urban growth boundary.
Okay, so thank you. So this is the last, this is the last site to develop within the urban growth boundary around that area. But we think that because it's on the other side of Imperial Road, it's really more the start of a new subdivision that would include those things. Now, that's correct?
Well, I think that you're asking, like, I'll let them answer, but I just would ask them, you don't have to get into expressing your opinion and what any thoughts you had on your plan, if that makes any sense. Mr. Corby?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Essentially, our Council Van Holst is somewhat correct. We believe this property should develop comprehensively with the lands to the north and the east because it was not part of the full comprehensive review process of the Fox Hollow Community Plan to the south. It was really separated and added on at the tail end of that review process.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And just a question about those other lands, the likelihood of those adjacent properties being included into the urban growth boundary. Are those farmlands? Are they being farmed right now? Are they something different? How likely are we to want to keep those as urban, as rural, I should say?
Staff?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's Paul Yeoman. So we will be looking at all lands and their appropriateness for development based on a series of criteria that will be coming with the urban growth boundary review. I will say that we will be looking at lands that are abutting the boundary, that are close to lands that are designated for future growth, such as the recommendation that's coming forward. I can also say that the previous lands, when they're evaluated to the east, were recommended as good candidates for development, and I anticipate that a review would come to a similar conclusion in the future.
Go ahead, Councillor Van Holst.
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate it, Mr. Chair. Just hoping to understand the situation because we'll have to vote.
Do you have more questions?
One more question. I think that the mayor's made a point that's good. It seems that the plans for this might go forward, since it is going to be developed at some point. They could go forward concurrently with some of these other studies that we're looking at. If we don't allow it, then how long would this development be set back? And I ask that because we are in a housing crisis. We want more housing, and now it seems like we're slowing that down in this particular instance.
I'm sorry, is that a question?
What's the difference in time for this development to happen if we do or don't follow the mayor's proposal?
All right, can you answer that, staff?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, I can do my best. Should the application and the applicant's request to be approved, you're looking at least a 2-year timeline for a subdivision review before building permits could be issued in the area. With a secondary plan associated with a future potential urban growth boundary discussion, it's likely longer than that because that process would take time. I will, though, reiterate some of the points that Mr. Corby made in his presentation, though, that a secondary plan isn't just about land use and transportation and road connections and servicing. It really is about defining the character for the community structure, and all those other associated policies that are really important to the formation of a neighborhood, especially when you're looking at things like Council's recent declaration related to climate change and how we might want to do growth different in the future.
Do you have anything further, Councillor Van Holst?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I think I'll let Councillor Morgan go, and then I promised the mayor I would go back to him to bring a motion. So I want to do that unless Councillor Morgan wants the motion on the floor first, and I'll leave that up to him.
I think I'll share some comments first, and maybe that will, I don't know if that'll help or hurt with the motion making process, but I think it's probably important for me to share my thoughts now that I've asked some questions. So the first piece is, the reason this is in the urban growth boundary is because the OMB decided that it should be. And it wasn't intended to be, because we probably would have approached this as a holistic block at some point in the future, which staff is now trying to try to suggest that we would do. So we're stuck in the situation where we have a piece that is legitimately within the urban growth boundary for historical reasons that probably shouldn't have been and wasn't the intention of the city. at the time. I do think that there are certainly housing issues. There's a housing affordability issue, but as was mentioned by Mr. Barrett, there is a 20-year supply in the city, and it is a question of where people want to build. And I think that this block of Hyde Park to Wonderland is an ideal block, given the character of the neighborhood to the south, to develop, but it should probably be done in a comprehensive way, as staff is suggesting. The school issue, the reason why there are so many portables at Sir Arthur Currie is not because we didn't think we knew how the area was going to build out. It's because the school board in the province do not build schools that are big enough. And they're unlikely to do that this time too, especially if we're going to potentially develop this whole area. And so looking at it in a comprehensive way, I think helps us solve that issue. And so my preference on this, to be honest, is not one that I'm able to achieve. And that is, that through some process of a review of the urban growth boundary, that we swap this land in and another land out, which of course the landowner on the other side is not going to want to do. And then we develop this in a comprehensive way. So I get and fully understand why our staff are saying, until we can do that, we want to plan this holistically. And I think that that can make a lot of sense, given that we have some neighborhoods in the city that are not planned very well and are creating significant issues for us. And I think planning out this whole neighborhood makes some sense. Where are we going to have commercial? Where is there walkability? Where is there medium, low, high density? Where are the schools? Where are the community facilities going to go? Fire protection, police protection, that sort of thing. So if council is going to proceed, or if the committee is going to proceed with trying to figure out how to allow this development early, there's got to be, and I don't know if staff can answer this, but there's got to be some process of us being able to look at this block of land, even if it isn't within the urban growth boundary, so that we have at least a comprehensive idea of what we would do across the board in this block, because I have very little interest in planning this as one small piece of a puzzle. And this block is actually a very small piece of what could be the larger planned area, and bringing that in and developing that is what is going to really help with housing prices and the development of the area, not this tiny block of which a significant portion of it would be taken up by a school. So I'm challenged on this, like my colleagues are. I think that's why you're seeing a lot of questions. I'm interested in the committee discussion, but I think staff have some merit in the approach that they've taken, given there is a very large block here that could be developed in a comprehensive way. But I certainly understand those members of the committee who feel the pressure to want to move forward and allow this piece that is within the urban growth boundary to be developed. I certainly understand that. And I know it is very difficult to try to go another direction on that because of the pressure that we're facing. But we're in an awkward situation because of some path dependency on this one. And there isn't really a good way out. So I'm going to listen to the committee recommendation. And I certainly respect all of my colleagues' views on this, regardless of where you land on it.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Mayor Holder. Did you want to bring a motion? And then we can see if we can get it seconded, and then we'll have comments directed directly to that motion.
Absolutely, Chair. And none of this is pre-planned, because I think it was important to have that discussion, as Councillor Hopkins and most recently Councillor Morgan have pointed out. I do want to say to Councillor Morgan, I don't feel any pressure with regard to bringing a motion forward. What I do feel pressure about is only this. Look, it's easy to say no to this development, and I respect the work that staff have done as they have looked to consider doing this holistically. I think for us, it's a different issue as well, and that is to act with compassion, to support education. And I see that as a major fundamental piece of this. And I'm tremendously confident that staff can put the pieces around this to make it work. Mr. Yeomans talked about character of the community for the neighborhood, and I 100% agree. But I think
Mr. Mayor, can we get your motion on the floor?
Let's do that. Yeah,
because you're not, I thought you wanted to bring a motion, so we can do that, and then everyone can speak to that.
Chair, you're very good at keeping the focus, and I appreciate that. And so, so apologies for the prelim. I would like to move that the official plan be amended to change the designation of the subject lands from an open space designation to low density residential designation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. The clerk have wording for that? I gave time for that.
Mr. Chair, we're just working on that. If you could give us just a few minutes.
A minute? No way. No, I'm joking. We can proceed on with the debate and then we'll get the wording out. All right, so first of all, we're going to need a seconder for that motion. Is there a seconder for the mayor's motion? And that is Councillor Hillier. So understanding it's a pretty straightforward motion, but we will get the wording up. So I will allow speakers to the motion now. And Mr. Mayor, if you'd like to go first, that's fine with me. It's committee, so you can speak again if you want.
Well, hopefully I don't need to, I've spoken a couple of times to the issue and the sentiments associated with this. I've talked about the respect I have for staff and the work that they've done to do this. And to me, I would rather take the approach that it's when, not if. And frankly, I think sooner makes more sense than later. And I look at the schooling issue, as I've indicated, Chair, and I think that's as much as I think I need to say at this point.
Thank you. So other speakers to the mayor's motion? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I won't give you too hard a time for missing me twice there, but through you to
my apologies, Councillor. I did miss you twice, and it's my fault. Sorry.
Through you to our staff, and I'm going to relate this to the motion that's now on the floor, just to try and stay procedurally consistent. But I was concerned when I heard a lot of ifs, not whens. But what other designation, aside from a residential designation, would you, opinion, I guess, I'm asking you to make, but in your expert opinion, what other sort of place types would we be giving this piece of land, if not a residential, low or medium density residential designation?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's something that we would determine through the secondary planning process. It's likely that there would be a neighborhood place type that's put on here, but it would be a neighborhood place type potentially that's not that's refined from the London Plan policies and different from what you're seeing there. It's hard for us to give you a full answer to that because it prejudges a further planning process that hasn't commenced. So my apologies for not being able to give you further clarity on that.
No, that's okay. That actually is still helpful to me in hearing that. I will just share that initially on reviewing this over the weekend and giving this some thought, I was supportive of staff's original recommendation. I thought that a community growth and environmental review would be something that, you know, might cause a delay of a few months, maybe even put it into next year's construction season. But as I start hearing discussions about bringing pieces of land in and out of the urban growth boundary, and then if adjacent pieces aren't brought in, then we still wouldn't entertain this application. We would, you know, essentially leave it sitting in limbo indefinitely until adjacent pieces of land were brought in. I become less comfortable with the staff recommendation and more inclined towards the applicant's position. I'm going to listen to what colleagues have to say on this, but when I start hearing if, not when, it does become a concern, and I think the mayor articulated that pretty well. But I am also not entirely comfortable with approaching this in a piecemeal way that doesn't look at the wider neighborhood. So I'm undecided, and I'm looking to hear what colleagues have to say about the motion that's on the floor now.
Councillor Hopkins, again, this is all to the mayor's motion, just so we're clear. So, and a lot of us have spoken already, so I'm hoping we'll all follow the mayor's lead and keep our comments to new information.
So this is the first time, Mr. Chair, that I'm speaking to the motion. I haven't seen the motion, but I understand
I certainly wasn't referring to you. It was a general comment, Councillor Hopkins. I wasn't suggesting you had spoken or anything like that. I hope you didn't think I was speaking to you when I said to focus on the issue.
No, but I just wanted to to reiterate that I am speaking to this motion. This is the
Excellent.
first time. I have not seen the motion, but I understand what we are doing is we are designating.
Can I
this-
stop you right there? It is up apparently now, so I didn't want to, apparently it is available now. I keep interrupting you, Counselor, and I don't mean to do that, but I just wanted to make sure you knew that.
Mr. Chair, it's Kathy Saunders.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if we could read it out because we're trying to
That would be great.
guess what the motion is, to be honest. So I think what
My plan here is to eat up Counselor Hopkins' full 5 minutes on my time, so it's a stall tactic, but, you know, we'll go ahead.
Okay, and I just want to acknowledge Mr. Yeoman's previous comments about a referral back because it's quite a substantial amount of work to be done before the council meeting. But my understanding of the mayor's motion is that notwithstanding the recommendation of the Director of Development Services, the following actions be taken with respect to the applications submitted by Auburn Developments, Inc. relating to the property located at 2631 High Park Road and 1521 Sunningdale Road West. Part A, the official plan amendment to change the designation of the subject lands from open space designation to a low density residential designation be approved. B, the official plan amendment to change the designation of the subject lands from green space place type to a neighborhood place type be approved. And then the C part would be that the civic administration be directed to bring forward the appropriate bylaws to implement parts A and B above. Then we would note the public comments that were given. So procedurally, from a clerk's perspective, we're a little concerned that the public wouldn't have seen these bylaws because the bylaws attached to the report would not reflect this. So I am speaking in support of Mr. Yeoman's suggestion of a referral back.
I'm sorry, referral back to draft the appropriate bylaw?
Yes, and bring them forward. Mr. Yeoman could speak better as to how much work has to be done to make the changes in time for them.
All right, so just so I'm clear, does that mean that you want the whole, this entire motion referred back, or can we vote on the motion and refer certain parts back? I'm not clear.
Through Mr. Chair, you could approve parts A, B, and C, and we would amend part C to say that the civic administration would bring those bylaws forward to a future meeting of Planning and Environment Committee for consideration, or otherwise we would have to have them ready for the May 25th council meeting.
Which is a challenge. So, Mr. Mayor, are you prepared to do that where we would be voting on the recommendation? It's just the bylaws would come back for a vote at a future meeting of planning, which to me would mean a redebating of the issue. It would be a putting it off for that procedural step to be properly completed. Am I right, Clerk?
Yes, we do have a second wording that may be of some assistance with the referral. If you wish me to read that out.
Be helpful.
You can read that out. I just want to, I think the committee needs to be really clear as to what will be going to council next week, that it wouldn't be coming back at the next planning meeting for a redebate on the entire issue. So I think that's important for a committee to know. So if you want to read out the second version, and then I can find out if the mover and seconder are content with that.
The second version would be that notwithstanding the recommendation of the Director of Development Services, the civic administration be requested to accept an application by Auburn Developments relating to the property located at 2631 High Park Road and 1521 Sunningdale Road West be referred back to the civic administration to undertake the following. A, amend the official plan to change the designation of the subject lands from an open space designation to an urban reserve, community growth, and environmental review designation. B, amend the London plan to change the place type of the subject lands from a green space place type to a future community growth place type and environmental review place type, it being noted that the amendments will come into full force and effect concurrently with map 1 and map 7 of the London Plan, Part C, to amend the official plan to change the designation of the subject lands from an open space to a low density residential designation. Part D, to amend the official plan to change the designation of the subject lands from a green space type to a neighborhood place type. So that motion is from Mr. Yeoman's perspective more doable from getting the work done.
All right. I would ask the mover and seconder if they're content to proceed with that second version of the motion.
Question I have for you, Chair, through to the clerk. You indicated you said at a future meeting. What does that mean? Recognizing that staff are terribly overburdened, but at the same time, I'm mindful of time. So could I have a sense of that, please?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, respectfully, I think that's Mr. Yeoman. Better question for Mr. Yeoman to respond.
I agree.
Go ahead, Mr. Yeoman.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So should the motion go forward and we're provided that direction by council, we could return to it with it at the next planning cycle. My concern is that having a change being made by committee and council like this, it's not a minor deviation to the recommendation. It is a significant change from the recommendations before you. So I want to make sure that you have everything fulsome in front of you for making that decision.
Thank you. Okay, I'll go back to the mover. Are you prepared to do that, understanding that it will come back in the next cycle of planning meeting?
For the next cycle of planning meeting, I'm prepared to do that, Chair. I'm prepared to revise my motion accordingly.
All right.
That feels
Councillor Hilmer's giving me a thumbs up, so that's good. So we're now proceeding on the second version of the motion, which I hope everyone will be able to see. And unfortunately, Councillor Hopkins, your 5 minutes are gone, and you're...
I'm going to ask for an extension.
You got an extension. I'm going to take a chair's prerogative here and grant you a 5-minute extension.
But before you do that, hold that extension. I would like to hear from the councillor of the ward before I make my comments.
Is that okay, Councillor Morgan? Do you mind leading in front of Councillor Hopkins?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So I understand the way the committee is going to go. It sounds like there's a majority who are supportive in this direction. I would like to try to help make this as good as possible for the local community. And so I have a couple questions and a suggestion. The first question, I guess, is for Mr. Yeoman and his team. And through a plan of subdivision process, is it possible to plan a wider area that may not be in the urban growth boundary so that you can plan for the wider perspective, even if you do not know when that might come in? Like, how does this actually work? Or do we have streets that may connect to parcels of land that who knows when it will come into the urban growth boundary? I'm just curious on how this would be handled from a design standpoint. And two, I think it's important for the members of the public who are directly impacted by the development on the site to have an opportunity to see what would be happening. So is it possible to add like a public site plan meeting to see what this would look like before a final decision is made on the site plan? So those are my two questions.
Thank you very much, staff.
Sure, and thank you. Through the chair, it's Matt Velberg speaking to Councillor Morgan. So the first piece would be, draft plan would be how we would come back and have public input. It wouldn't be a site plan if we were doing a plan of subdivision. So that would be the opportunity where we'd have a PPM and folks could comment on what's happening on the property. With respect to how we would plan this for the subdivision, so I mentioned at the top that our engineering partners were looking for holding provisions on for a number of the services. So the first one I'll speak to is stormwater. So for this, the outlet is actually to the south on the other side of Sunningdale Road. I believe it's Fox Hollow Swim 1 is the pond. So the challenge that the applicant will have is actually getting stormwater to cross Sunningdale Road. We do have some constraints in the right of way right now. I believe there's a rather large water main at a depth that might be a spot where you might also want to have a storm sewer. With respect to water servicing, so drinking water, the capacity for the water system in this area has not been considered in the Hyde Park pumping station. So this area would be part of the Hyde Park pressure zone. And that zone actually goes all the way to the east to Medway Valley. So the point of having the secondary plan would be for us to identify what the populations are for the whole area and then be able to consider the water servicing holistically and allow us to consider these lands as well. The third piece from the sanitary perspective, so there's currently no municipal sanitary sewer fronting these lands. The outlet for this property is actually further to the east. It's about 1 kilometer away, and the applicant's proposing a temporary force main to bring the sanitary flows out to, the street is Tokala near Bridge Haven. So it's in the Creekview or Fox Hollow plan right now. The challenge with some of those temporary facilities is that through the London plan and through our DC bylaw, what we're looking to do is have the ultimate outlet established so that we know, so there's an end date to some of those temporary facilities. And at this point, again, that hasn't been considered. So what we'd end up having to do if council directed us to take that approach, we'd end up developing an operations and maintenance agreement that would be the responsibility of the landowner or the developer for until that ultimate outlet is available. With respect to the transportation, again, like we're looking at bringing sidewalks to a point, and we have sidewalks that end. So they have no outlet. So you're not creating that connectivity across multiple properties. I mean, while that could be an option here, the more appropriate way is to look at it holistically. I know I'm talking about the same thing over and over again, but I just want to reiterate that it is a bit of a challenge for the developer, and there is a cost to them in order to come up with a servicing solution.
Yes, if I could through the chair, my question is, can you actually do a secondary plan with parts of it not in the urban growth boundary? Like, is that something that is possible to design so that you know how this piece would fit holistically into a future puzzle, with the caveat that we don't actually know when that would be completed because we don't know what the results of an urban growth boundary would be?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's an excellent question. Our opinion right now is that no, we could not do that, given that prejudges considerable lands that are outside the boundary and potential timing of when they were. My opinion is that if 50% or more of the lands were to be in, that's when we could actually trigger the secondary plan to be completed. That's when we'd have a good handle on the scope of the community structure, and enough information to complete the servicing plans associated with the development.
Okay, so I'm not sure how much time I have left, Chair, but you can cut me off. I still have the same challenge with this, and that is I think we're moving towards planning a subdivision that is isolated from the rest of the block, because I can't see how we can possibly plan for the entire block. And I'm not convinced that's ideal. I think what we're going to end up with is potentially a small piece that operates in isolation from the rest of a future contemplated block here, which, you know, is something that you got to be okay with, and that if you are, that's fine. I'm not convinced yet, but I certainly understand why committee is considering going the direction they are. I understand what colleagues are attempting to do. I'm not there yet on how this would integrate with the rest of the piece, but I'll listen to the rest of the debate. I appreciate colleagues listening to my thoughts on this.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Hopkins, now you are certainly going ahead now.
Thank you, and thank you, Deputy Mayor Morgan, for your comments too. So I will not be supporting this referral. This is significant. I am feeling very uncomfortable here as a committee. We are making an OPA. I just feel very uncomfortable about that. We do have a process in place. We know that there is a review with the urban growth boundary and the extra lands. This area will be looked at. I am not at all going to consider supporting any referral back.
Anything further? All right, I'm going to turn the chair over to the vice chair, and I'll provide my comments.
I have the chair, Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very, very difficult situation. I think you can vote on both sides of this and be fully supported by the information that we've been provided with. I do want to make a comment briefly about this entire school issue. Having been a school board trustee, I understand completely the process of getting a new school for a school board. And I am concerned that a director of education is saying, well, this is what we're looking at, is putting a school up there. I guess I would remind that director of education that that's a matter that has to go to the province for approval. In other words, when I was a school board trustee, building a new school and the location of the new school, all aspects of that were within the jurisdiction of the provincial government, meaning they had to approve it. Didn't hear anything about that. Secondly, with all due respect, I would say that much like a city manager, a director of a school board answers to a board of trustees, and I haven't heard anything from them. Thirdly, if the director of education, with all due respect, wanted to weigh in on this application, they should have provided a letter, information, or made a delegation. And I appreciate the director of education spoke to the mayor, but the director of education should have spoken to planning, the planning committee. And so I can't put a lot of weight on this idea there's an impending school there or it's going to happen overnight. Given my experience with schools, I remember waiting years to get a new school. So that's where I want to leave those comments. I think the challenge here is that the lands are within the urban growth boundary and that the municipal board, when they made their decisions, expressly said, this land is going to be included in the urban growth boundary, regardless of whether it's a cemetery. And it doesn't rely on that decision as to whether it's a cemetery, which has led the applicant to want to develop, rightly so, this land. On the other side, I think staff's completely correct that this is not a good way to proceed. And I don't think anybody should be indignant about the idea that the City of London would rather plan an entire area properly than just have one small part of the area developed first. So having reviewed everything, I just think this is a vote that could go both ways. But I think when I start hearing about the infrastructure, meaning the water and the wastewater, not being properly in place for developing this subdivision, that's really a big concern to me. So that last bit I heard from Councilor or Deputy Mayor Morgan that he raised with staff about all the work that needs to be done, it's concerning. It really is. So we've been put in a tough position, committee. I think we know that. And so however we vote, it'll go to council and council will vote on it. But I think any vote is supported very much by the evidence on either side. So I don't think we're going against anything either way, going in either way. So those are my comments.
I'll return the chair back to you. Mr. Chair, I do have Councillor Van Holst and then Councillor Hillier.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. I'll go first to the committee. Councillor Hillier.
Thank you very much. Yes, I second this motion on the basis that it is doable, but my concerns are back to the storm sewers and the wastewater as before. And I am wavering on the side of not supporting this right now. I'm sorry, I did second the motion, but if we don't have the wastewater and the sewers in place, I can't do it. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just have a question through you. This is a 20-hectare site, and we were told we have 20 years of land already prepared for development. How many hectares would that be? Just so I can compare those two numbers.
Staff.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's Mr. Human. I don't know if we can do that calculation quite on the fly, but I'll do my best.
Would you like the Jeopardy music to go while you're doing that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I don't have actually enough information in front of me.
That's fine. That's fine, Mr. Yeoman. Anything else, Councillor?
I don't have another question. I can see this is a difficult decision.
All right. Anything further from committee members before we vote on the mayor's motion? Oh, I'm sorry, did Councillor Hillier, I didn't think he withdrew his second. I just said he said he wasn't being supportive, possibly. Am I right about that, or are you withdrawing your second?
No, I did not withdraw my second. I just wanted to continue the conversation, but I did not support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you can do that soon if you want. So I'm going to call the vote on the mayor's motion.
Chair, I'll vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion fails 4-2.
All right, so we'll be moving on back to the staff recommendation, which I'm hoping someone will move in second, and we won't have a lengthy discussion about that if it's repeating anything that we've had. Councillor Hopkins, are you prepared to move the staff recommendation? Yes, and Councillor Lewis is prepared to second. Anything further before we vote on the staff recommendation? All right, I'll call the vote on that.
No.
Oh, go ahead, Councillor Hopkins. You want to speak to it?
Yeah, since I'm moving the motion.
Sure, go ahead.
I have to. First of all, I want to thank the mayor. I know he feels very strongly about the need for housing and the importance in our area, and I do appreciate that. And I also appreciated the debate. It's taught me just listening and reading this recommendation. It is a tricky one. I had myself, when I was reading the recommendation, are the lands in or are they out even, given the history of these lands? But I am supportive. I think there is a process in place, and the comprehensive review and the secondary plan. I know representing a ward that has a lot of development, those plans are really important. How we connect our neighborhoods as well is also really important. And we have those plans in place. And just finishing off with that, I again just want to thank staff and for this recommendation, and look forward to further conversations on the urban growth boundary review.
Thank you. Anything further before we vote? I'll call the vote.
Chair, I'll vote no.
All right.
Closing the vote, the motion passes 4-2.
Thank you very much. And thank you for staff for dealing with the challenging issue, as did the applicant. So thank you for everyone. Moving on to item 3.3, which is a public participation meeting with regard to 3557 Colonel Talbot Road. And I need a motion to open the public participation meeting. Councillor Hopkins, a seconder, Mayor Holder. And unless there's something further, I'll call the vote.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you.
Closing the
I'll go to staff for presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Melanie Vivian. The proposed development is located at 3557 Colonel Talbot Road and consists of 4 two-story townhouse blocks consisting of a total of 21 units, with each block at 9 meters in height. The site was rezoned last year to permit cluster townhouse dwellings at a maximum density of 51 units per hectare. With the proposed 21 units, the applicant is proposing the maximum density. Parking on site is being provided at a rate of 2 per unit, which does exceed the requirement of the zoning bylaw, which requires 1.5 per unit, for a total of 44 parking spaces, and this includes the 2 visitor parking stalls. Appendix A on page 329 of the agenda does provide the current proposed site plan showing the proposed parking, which is included, 1 in the garage, 1 in the driveway. The resolution of council from last year's rezoning included direction to the site plan approval authority for enhanced screening, privacy along the northern property line, including boundary landscaping along the north and west property boundaries. So on pages 332 and 333 of the report, these provide for the proposed tree preservation and landscape plan. And this is for council's review there. And staff have received 3 comments from the public with respect to this application, with the concerns being raised for the privacy and loss of boundary landscaping. So in terms of the landscaping and the privacy, it tends to go hand in hand in this regard. And it has been a prominent matter for this application. Of the existing trees on site, the applicant is proposing to retain the cedar hedge along the western property boundary and to retain 6 additional boundary trees while planting 13 additional trees, as well as placing a 2.1 meter high board-on-board fence along the northern property boundary. It may be important to note at this time that that board-on-board fence is higher than what we typically see for the site plan control bylaw and is from the fencing bylaw. Based on the limitations due to a swale and retaining wall on the western property boundary, additional screening is being sought where there are gaps in the existing hedge and where possible given those limitations. So based on that, staff are of the opinion that the proposed plans satisfy council's resolution. I'm happy to go into more detail on any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions, technical questions? Mayor Holder?
I'm not sure this was a technical question, but I recall the concerns expressed by residents in the area. And have there been subsequent discussions with staff and residents since that time?
Go ahead, staff.
Through you, Mr. Chair. We received some comments from those members of the public that were involved with the rezoning process. The only comments that came forth that had pertained to the site plan application were the privacy and the loss of trees. There were questions regarding the proposed decks, but I will note that the decks along the northern property boundary do comply with the zoning bylaw. So essentially we have no control in reducing that in that regard.
Sorry, Chair, and I appreciate the answer. Thank you. My question was, I want perhaps a bit more specific. Were there any of the residents that corresponded to you, were they supportive of this application since our last meeting as a result of these changes? Please.
Go ahead, staff.
It's Mike Pease here, Manager of Site Plans. I can advise that there hasn't been any outward support in that sense, if that's the question that's at hand. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
That was the question. Thank you, Chair.
Any other technical questions? If there aren't, we'll go to the public. Does the applicant wish to present?
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Matt Campbell here from Zelenka Priamo. I would like to just say a couple of words if that's appropriate at this time.
Sure.
Great, thanks very much. I don't have a whole lot to add to staff's presentation, but I will add just to the previous comment. There's been ongoing discussions with the neighbors. The zoning application for this, you recall council approved the zoning application to permit the development. That was subsequently appealed to LPAT. The developer was in consultation with the appellants, which were the neighbors, and they came to a resolution in order for the neighbors to withdraw the LPAT appeal, which I understand has largely dealt with landscaping. And as part of that settlement process, the developer has incorporated a number of landscaping features into the site design, which are largely reflected on the site plan that you have in front of you today. I can advise that we're doing everything we can to add more landscaping and really solidify the vegetative buffer there. Again, not a whole lot more to add to staff's comments, and we're looking forward to the public comments on this one.
Thank you. Any other public presentations? One more.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Heidi Smith.
Ms. Smith? Hello? Ms. Smith?
Sorry about that. Just trying to find my unmute button.
Oh, listen, we all have that challenge in these times. So you have 5 minutes, so you can start now.
Okay, I have my husband Darren here with me. We actually live on the property, live in the property bordering the west side of this site. And I understand from what Matt was saying and just some neighborhood discussion that lots of consultation was happening with the neighbors along the north side of the property, but we actually haven't had any conversation with the developers. We're very happy to see that the cedar hedge is staying. That was our primary concern. It does provide a lot of privacy and screening, and we enjoy the wildlife in it. But our other concern at the time that we came to the meeting last fall was about the runoff along our side of the property. And I guess looking at the plans, and I have a hard time seeing it, I'll be very honest. I tried to put magnifiers on, but it's really hard to see from the printed paper. But the discussion sounds like there's a retaining wall and stormwater management's been incorporated. It just is a little unknown to us. It's not very tangible for us to picture what that's going to look like. That cedar hedge sits right in the property line between our property and the development site. And there are 3 mature evergreen trees less than a meter from the property line, which are proposed to be taken out to facilitate, I guess, the retaining wall going in. And our concern is how close that is and the impact of that on that cedar hedge. So it's great that it's going to stay. It provides great screening and privacy, but is it going to survive the construction and the retaining wall? And since we have no fence going up there and no enhanced landscaping or trees being put along there because the roadway comes so close to that cedar hedge, that there would be no way to rectify that after the fact, and then we are without recourse. So that is our concern.
All right, thank you very much. I'll try to get you an answer to that concern. So we have about 3 minutes left for your husband. Does he want to?
No, I'm good.
Good. All right, any other public?
Mr. Chair, there are no other members of the public.
Thank you very much. Then I'll look for a motion to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Lehman. All in favor? Oh, we're going to vote on the screen. I don't know why. I put my hand up and I got you all started. Sorry. Getting excited.
Well, I don't get to put my hand up, Chair. I'll vote yes.
All right, good. Thank you.
Councillor Hopkins? Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you very much. I wonder if the applicant could, or someone could address the concern that was raised by the second member of the public, just to deal with that issue.
Mr. Chair, Matt Campbell here.
Go ahead.
So when we put together these site plan applications, we rely on professional arborists to give their opinion on the survival chances of any particular tree. And as part of this application, we've submitted a tree preservation report and plan, which identifies the trees to be removed and the trees to be retained, which I believe Ms. Smith was making reference to. So again, we rely on those professionals for their opinion. And in this case, it is their opinion that hedge can be retained in light of some of the works that are going on there. There is the retaining wall. It's about 0.5 meter in height or so that comes close to that cedar hedge. We are required to match grades though. If we can't match grades, then obviously we're going to be impacting root structure, which would not be so great for that hedge. So in the engineering plans, and staff can confirm this, we are matching grades where appropriate. I can also advise that some of the infrastructure in that area will be changing on a subsequent revision. There is some stormwater management infrastructure that is below that retaining wall. That's being moved to underneath the driveway. So it'll be less impactful for that hedge. In the unlikely event that any portion of that hedge does not survive, which again, we rely on the arborists to give us their professional opinion as to whether they will survive. In this case, they do say it will. In the event that it does not survive, we could certainly replace plants in that location. Obviously, it's not an ideal solution, but that would be restoration that would be in compliance with any sort of development agreement that would be registered on title.
Thank you. Committee, questions, comments, motions? Councillor Hopkins? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to follow up on the public's question about the runoff in the water, I wonder if staff can also make a comment about the swale that is going to be put into this development.
Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's Michael Pease. I'm going to tee up Paul Deloso, one of our senior technologists, to discuss that.
It's a slow tee up.
Sorry.
There we go.
Mic was on mute. Sorry, Councillor Hopkins, could you repeat the concern?
Yes, there was a comment made about water runoff, and I understand that there is a swale that's also being built within this development. If you could just make the comment about the swale and exactly where it's going to be.
Well, as far as I know, there is an existing side yard swell that runs along the property line. That should be unaffected. As for runoff, the site is supposed to contain, or it has been designed to contain, all stormwater generated by their site. So as far as our review has gone, we have no concerns really with that. Few minor details that need to be cleaned up through the review, but generally everything is conformed to City of London standards.
Councillor, anything further?
Yeah, I've just got a further question, and I'd like to make my comments. This is a development in Ward 9. And my last question, because there has been a lot of concern in the community about privacy and landscaping. Those are the two issues that I've heard over and over again with the concerns that the community has. And I understand we're going through this site plan process, and we still have that process to move forward. And the applicant, Mr. Campbell, I appreciate your comments that there's probably still some further work to be done with the trees and the landscaping. But just a question to make sure that are there going to be opportunities as staff and the applicant continue with this process, that to look at further screening or landscaping to help with the privacy issue? That's a question to staff.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So as part of the review process, we can explore more opportunities for not only trees, but smaller plantings on site. It's based on the review of the site with the swale and the retaining wall along the west end of Building A. There is limited opportunity to provide for plantings in that area. So I think at this point, given what's already proposed in the landscaping, we'd be looking more so at the rear of Building C and Building D at the south side of the site, as well as the open sod area. However, we'd have to review that with our landscape architect to ensure that if anything else is planted in the area, it is going to survive and flourish.
Can we get a motion on the floor? Did you want?
I'd be happy to put forward the motion.
Okay, you can move it and then comment. The seconder, Councillor Lehman, and then I'll go back to you for your comments, Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, and I just want to thank the community and the applicant working together to come about with a resolution. I know this was contentious in the community. I'm glad to see the application moving forward. The changes that the applicant has made, reducing some units, developing around an OS4 and an OS5 is challenging at the best of times. And I would like to encourage the applicant to do whatever needs to be done as you develop around this sensitive area to protect the natural features that exist. And I will put forward the motion.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Mayor Holder, you want to speak to this?
Thanks very much, Chair. I'd like to acknowledge the applicant for the efforts they've had in working with the neighborhood. My challenge at committee, which I did not support this application, were for several reasons: privacy, loss of boundary landscaping, too intense for the site in terms of the number of units. I'm going to come back to that as my comment. So many aspects of this application seem reasonable, but I'll not support it insofar as I think that that it's too intense for this location. And I respect the ward councillor's perspective on this. And if it goes forward, I certainly wish the neighborhood and the applicant success and great cooperation, because that'll be critical. It doesn't fix, to me, the issue of the intensity of development, but I wanted my thoughts known.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any further comments before we call the question? There being none, I'll call the vote.
Sure, I'll vote no.
Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-1.
Moving on, there's one item for direction, a direction from Councillor Van Holst with regards to a study, a report back with regards to the Meadow Lily ESA. The correspondence is there, and I wonder if Mr. Fabro would be willing to comment on the request and how it would fit in with work that's being done, and then I'll let the councillor speak to his request. Is Mr. Fabro there?
Sorry, through the chair, Mr. Fabro had to leave, so you're stuck with me.
That's unfortunate, but you know, we'll make do.
Thank you. So pitch hitting for Mr. Fabro. Just a couple of comments I could provide on this. First off, the request is that we bring forward a report looking at additional steps that might be undertaken to preserve the environmental heritage and the natural heritage features of the Meadow Lily ESA. I'd like to just remind council that the Meadow Lily Conservation Master Plan was just completed and adopted by this council in 2020. And as part of that process, there was an updated boundary for the ESA that was established. One of the primary purposes of doing a conservation master plan is to actually characterize and delineate the natural heritage features and functions within the boundaries of the ESA, and to confirm the boundaries of the environmentally significant area, and then to plan for the sustainable management of that area. Also, any development around any ESA, and in this ESA in particular, or any other natural heritage feature would be subject to the requirements of the environmental management guidelines as they would apply to how you would review a development application adjacent to those lands. And that those environmental management guidelines would set out the requirements for an EIS that would need to be undertaken that would address such things as buffers, setbacks, mitigation activities, or any compensation that may be required for natural heritage impacts that could not. So all of that process has now already been laid out, has been undertaken, and the natural heritage features and the natural heritage area of the Meadow Lily ESA, in fact, have been defined and have been established through the work that was done and then confirmed through the Conservation Master Plan.
Thank you. And I do enjoy hearing from you. I was just making light earlier when I spoke to you. Councillor?
Thank you very much, Mr.
Go
Chair.
ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, yes. So our last decision regarding the development around the ESA was pretty challenging, and I think people had hoped we would do a little more. So my initial my initial submission were a couple of very specific ideas, and it was suggested that it would be better to ask in along this lines is just to ask, for a report what might come back, and then that would allow myself and others to submit some suggestions, and then perhaps staff could evaluate and return those. So that was the purpose of this. Of course, the area around the ESA there's other portions that could be developed as well. And I think we may find the same challenges and concerns from the residents. There might be an opportunity to head some of those things off with a few minor changes. And even the response to the development that's happening now, there might be some mitigating actions we could take. So my hope is to look at those, and if this isn't the best way to do something like that, then perhaps staff could advise maybe taking a different approach. But certainly, I'm not asking that all the work that has been done be redone. I'm hoping to look at a couple of new ideas that might be small but helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I can, if you'd indulge me through you to ask a question of Councillor Van Holst. I'm looking for a little clarity and particularly in follow-up to Mr. Barrett's response. My sense is that you were referring to preservation steps in areas immediately adjacent to the ESA and not necessarily the conservation plan for the ESA itself. Is that correct?
That's right.
So just in follow-up to that then, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to, first of all, I share Councillor Van Holst's concerns about a decision that was recently made in the area. I'm not sure that this motion accomplishes that, addressing some of those concerns the way it is right now. So I want to just offer to the councillor, I'd be happy to meet with him offline and discuss further some steps we could take. I just feel that this is maybe too general and maybe needs some more specifics included before it can advance. And rather than try and wordsmith and sort things out here at committee, I'd be happy to meet with the councillor one-on-one and perhaps bring back something to a future meeting.
Councillor Van Holst, is that acceptable to you? And then you can just withdraw this letter and come back with having a member of the committee moving it?
Okay, thank you very much. It is, as I said, I had some other ideas originally. It was thought maybe a more general motion would be good. This one, as the councillor suggested, may be too general, and that's fine. So we can work on that, come back with something with greater specificity, and
so you're going to withdraw this one and come back?
That's all I need to know right now. If that's even possible. So maybe it's something that just has to be received. I don't know. Perhaps the clerk can.
Yeah, we can just receive this. Somebody make a motion to receive, and we'll leave it at that. Councillor Hopkins will move to receive it. Mayor Holder will second that. I think we can vote, can't we? Yeah.
Mr. Chair, can I just make a quick comment?
Sure.
The councillor for bringing this forward. I know when we approved the conservation plan last year, we had enlarged the ESA area as well. And I know it is a very important part in the community. And I thank him for the questions, because I had a number of questions that I followed up with staff to make sure we how we develop around this ESA. I have a number of developments in my ward around ESAs, and it is something that we do have to be mindful how we work within the ESA. And I appreciate just having this conversation and understanding on the conservation plan for Meadow Lily.
Thank you, Councillor Hillier.
Thank you very much. Yes, if the counselor could please include me in those discussions and the word near. You're saying near Meadowlily. How close are we talking? So I am very concerned about this area. So please include me in those conversations. Thank you.
There you go. Lots of interest and it's something we'll be coming back. So the motion is to receive and file, and I will call, unless somebody else wants to venture in, I'll call the vote.
I'll vote yes, Mayor. Chair.
Boy,
Reminds-
that slip, I could make so many comments on that slip, but you know.
It rhymes with mayor.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. Is under deferred matters, additional business is the third report of the Trees and Forests Advisory Committee. They make a number of suggestions to staff. No, from what I could see, no directions to staff, which of course they're not supposed to be doing. So we drafted up a motion just to accept that. And is it on the screen or is it going to be up? So if someone can we could have a look at that, and then I just need a mover and seconder. And if someone, I'll get it moved and seconded then if there's any comments. Moved by Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Any comments? There being none, I will call the vote on the motion.
Yes, Chair. Not mayor.
I like that title, Chair, but not Mayor. I can live with that.
6-0.
And that brings us to adjournment. So I just need a mover and second. Councillor Lewis with enthusiasm, seconded by Councillor Hillier. And we'll just do a hand vote, all in favor. Thanks very much. Great work tonight, committee. Appreciated the debate. See you later.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.